start? Good evening, Chairman C. Harit Bhai Dhariwal, today's faculty, C. Sunil Bhai Malu, and dear participants. I would request everyone to put right hands on the heart for ICI mode.
येष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति येष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामंशो पुरुषो निर्मिमाणः निर्मिमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वतदूनाद्यकश्चन एतद्वैता 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 एतद्वैता.
Now I would request Chairman C. Harit Bhai Dhariwal to give opening remarks.
Thank you, Sunil Bhai. The faculty for today's session, C.A. Sunil Malu, the Directors Committee Chairman and Treasurer of our branch, C.A. Sunil Sanghvi. All the participants who have joined us, a very, very good evening to all of you. And welcome to yet another, in fact, the final day of our Direct Tax series. And a wonderful series. We are getting so very good responses from all of you. The one session which is pending on the 194Q TDS section, I think it will be held somewhere in the month of October, first week of October. We will let you know for that date. Today, just two important announcements. First is our direct tax RRC. I think we all are practicing in direct taxes, but I see so many less people from Ahmedabad coming and registering for RRC. You know, there are people from Mumbai, from Delhi, from Amravati. There are people even from Patna who are registering for this RRC. But I don't see a lot of people from Ahmedabad coming in. I think it is perhaps the first time that we are having a direct tax RRC. So I would urge all of you to register for this. We will be having a very enlightening 2.5 days. We all will be sitting together and studying for this direct tax RRC. The faculties are best. They're all coming physically there. The topics are very relevant. And apart from that, we are going to have a good session like morning 10 to 7 we'll be studying. And after that, we can even enjoy the Mumbai nightlife and all. So do register for the same. Today is perhaps today is the last day of early bird, which we are extending based on the request from many members. But do register at the earliest because the flight tickets will get expensive. Apart from this, yes, we are also launching a very interesting RERA course, so RERA decoded kind of a thing, wherein from 27th of this month till 1st of October, 5 days, we are going to cover the entire RERA Act, right from your registration forms to your penalties to your prosecution and all the litigation and everything is there. So that is going to be launched, and sometimes you do register for that. That is an absolutely virtual course. So you can apply for this registration for the RERA course as well. Two important sessions apart from these two major events is on the 23rd, we have a special session on the accounting standards for non-corporate entities and SQC. And on 24th, we have forensics accounting and investigation standards. Overview of the same will be given by Durgesh Pandey. So two very important sessions on that front. So do register for that. And I would love to see a lot of people from you registering for the Direct Tax RRC. I think in case you have any issues, any queries, Sunil Bhai is here. You can ask me anytime, and we are definitely going to address them. With this, I once again thank CM Sunil Malu, I think, for sparing his valuable time. Sunil Bhai, thank you for taking a very important session, important judgment. It's been long that we have not debated on this or not discussed important judgments. So great to have this topic here, and thank you for taking it for all of us. And thank you for all the participants for taking part in this wonderful series. And I wish you all a very happy learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. We are having with us C.A. Sunil Bhai Malu, today's faculty, who is going to deliver on the important judgments in the income tax. C.A. Sunil Bhai Malu is a practicing chartered accountant based at Ahmedabad and is a partner of Sunil Malu and Company. He is mainly practicing the field of corporate consulting and the direct tax litigation since 11 years. He is a regular contributor to articles and presentation at various journals, CTC and ICI branches. With this brief introduction, We welcome you, sir. Let's have a big round of applause for the faculty, CS Sunil Malu. And dais is yours, sir. You may start the session.
And I would
Thank you, sir.
request all the participants to please switch on the cameras. I think let us have more interaction. A very important session today. So please, if possible, switch on your cameras.
We will have last 10-15 minutes for the question answers, if any.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations to the entire team of ICA Ahmedabad, Chairman Harit Bhai and Sunil Ji Sanghvi and the entire DirectX committee for conducting such a wonderful DirectX series for all the practitioners and all for learning activities. So today we are going to have discussion on the recent important topics, judgments of income tax. Let me share my screen first. Sir, the screen is visible?
Yes, it is visible.
Thank you. So today we are going to discuss some important decisions from Supreme Court, High Court, as well as ITATs. The Supreme judgments are selected in such a manner so that we could have some fruitful and useful discussion, healthy discussion on this. I would like to have interactive session. As Harit sir said, all the participants can raise their issue and start the discussion on any point which is relevant to particular judgment that we are going to discuss. And these judgments are selected keeping in mind three things. It should be useful for all the persons, whether he is in compliance, whether he is at advisory or in litigation. So technically, the discussion would be helpful for the small firms, mid-size firm, as well as the big practitioners. First decision is the landmark decision of Supreme Court in the case of Engineering Analysis Center of Excellence Private Limited versus CIT. This decision was a landmark decision because in this case, Supreme Court has dealt with and decided the 103 cases connected matters in this single judgment. It is having a wider impact. This judgment was basically based on the impact of taxation of royalty. As we all know, the taxation of royalty is a matter of international taxation. But friends, in today's world, international taxation is not different from the direct tax practice. Because when we are practicing direct tax, our clients would have invariably some international transactions. We will have to advise them, we will have to guide them, and we will have to take their planning, advisory, and litigation part relating to the international taxation matters as well. So this judgment would be useful while we are issuing 15 CACB for the purpose of Section 195. It would be useful when we are handling some TDS 201 proceedings. It would be helpful when we are going to decide 40A IA discounts, and also useful when we are going to take a necessary call while making the tax audit in 44AB. This is technically a decades old controversy, whether the software payment which are being made by Indian parties to foreign party would be taxable in India or not, whether the TDS would be deductible or not. So this judgment basically covers these 5-6 bullet points. First one is different category of transactions. So which type of transactions would be technically covered by this judgment so that we can make use of that in our cases. Second would be, it has discussion on the interplay of DTAA and domestic law. It also discussed the word license and copyright used in the definitions. And last but not the least, significance of OECD commentary while we are interpreting any DTAA. So Supreme Court has disposed of a bunch of 103 matters altogether in this single judgment. Those 103 matters were on this bifurcated on these four factual aspects. First one, sale of software directly by non-resident to end user in India. Second one, software by an NR to Indian distributor for resale to end consumer. Third issue is sale of software by NR to a foreign distributor and then resale to end consumer. Fourth one is sale of software bundled with hardware by an NR to Indian distributor. So technically, these four categories covered each and every aspect of a software sale by a non-resident to ultimate user which is situated in India. Whether he is an end user, whether he is a distributor, this cover all the related aspects. So it is very useful judgment. First thing that this judgment has dealt with is interplay of DTAA with domestic law. As we all know, Section 90 subsection 2 had an explanation 4 which says that any provision of DTAA which is more beneficial to SSC would prevail over the contrary provision of Income Tax Act. As we all know, royalty definition in Income Tax Act is more expansive in section 914. But the royalty definition is also defined in the DTAA. DTAA definition is something restrictive. Therefore, it is more beneficial to the assessee. So in this case and also in all those cases, the assessee argued that the beneficial provision of DTAA should be applicable. The second point is why and how the definition of royalty in income tax is wider as compared to the DTAA. Because of the wording used in Income Tax Act, the wording is used based on the three following reasons. The definition of DTAA as per Income Tax Act is wider than the DTAA as defined royalty defined in DTAA. Consideration under the Act also include the lump sum consideration. Granting of license is expressly included within the definition of all or any right. Friends, when we see the definition of royalty in Income Tax Act, it uses the word granting of license. But this judgment discuss and elaborate on the point, what is the license? What is the meaning of license? Whenever we are going to install any software in our computer system, first of all, when installing the software, we are asked by the software to read the license agreement, which I think hardly any of us would be reading, and then we usually tick accept the condition and move further. But the SSC in this case argued before the Supreme Court that department also even failed to read that end user license agreement. If the department read that end user license agreement, it would clearly mean that the license is given for a particular purpose, for a particular use of software in a particular system. It is not a license to make copies of the software. So technically, this cannot be a royalty. The license which is given under the end user license agreement that we all agree and then install the software is not a license in terms of Copyright Act. While interpreting this judgment, Supreme Court has gone beyond the wording of Income Tax Act. The other particular statute where these particular terms are defined and used specifically has been referred to. Copyright Act section 30 contains the license in different terms. But here the word is used is not only license, end user license agreement. Therefore, both are different. License which impose restriction or condition for use of computer software. The end user license did not grant any such right or interest, or at least a right to reproduce the software. Whenever we purchase any software, we have only right to use that software. So therefore, such kind of right cannot be treated as royalty. It would be a business income. Last important aspect which was discussed by the Supreme Court in this judgment was on the aspect of significance of OECD commentary. We already had a landmark judgment of Azadi Bachao, wherein it was held that OECD commentary is useful in interpretation of the DTAAs. But here something more is discussed and elaborated in detail. What happened here is, in the OECD commentary, though India is not a member, India is only observer. India has made a reservation that the definition of royalty as per DTAA and as per the commentary is not acceptable to us. We reserve our right to tax such kind of royalty. And based on such reservation, what India did is amended section 916 explanation 2 for the royalty. But this was a unilateral amendment. India has not updated the DTAAs with respective countries. Therefore, the court held that when the wording used in DTAA is somewhat similar to the OECD commentary, then OECD commentary would be useful in interpreting those kind of DTAA. Irrespective of what the India's position is taken in the commentary, even though reservation is filed by the India against the OECD commentary, but what would be the binding is the text of the agreement which is signed by India and other countries. So this is a very important judgment as far as the software transactions, software purchase transactions are concerned. Sunilji, we'll have a discussion on judgment by judgment or at the end?
As you say, Sunil bhai.
No problem. Whatever more convenient. I want to have this more intellectual and interactive. So if any point, anything to discuss on this, we can discuss here, or otherwise we will move further, sir. The next judgment in the series is also delivered by the Supreme Court. It is on the very small topic, small but interesting subject of 234B. In this case, what happened was a non-resident who was a tax resident of Japan was all of a sudden ordered with the tax liability under the Income Tax Act. Their tax was upheld by the tribunal and high court and all that, but the assessee then challenged. Then, sir, you take tax, you collect tax from us, no problem. But we should not be liable for 234B. The assessee given a reasoning that 234B liability arises only after giving credit of TDS. And on our income, TDS was supposed to be deducted by the payer party. Now, if the payer has failed to deduct the TDS, then I should not be penalized with 234B interest. So if at all you want to collect the interest, collect from the payer and not from me. I am ready to pay the taxes. So department take contention that 234B should be read in isolation. It should be read as per the normal provisions of 234B without considering the logic of the assessee. Then the court made a reference to section 209, which deal with the computation of advance tax. In that case, it is clearly given that the definition of assessed tax under 234B pertain to tax deducted or collected at source. Liability to pay advance tax and non-payment of short payment of tax would have been satisfied only after considering the TDS effect. So if TDS is not collected by the, not deducted by the payer party, the non-resident cannot be called upon to pay 234B interest. At the last, Supreme Court made an important observation that revenue is not remediless and can proceed against the payer who has defaulted in deducting the tax. So this is a very technical point where any lapse on the part of payee to deduct the tax, then the counterparty would not be charged with the 234B interest liability. This is the third judgment that we are going to discuss, is on the topic of 14A. Friends, 14A is a one section that is favorite to all the assessing officer. While making assessment of any corporate or any big assessee, first question they will focus disallowance of 14A. So what the 14A is all about? 14A basically consider and cover the aspect of expense which are incurred for earning the exempt income. But what happens? Sometimes the assessee does not show that we have, assessee claims that we have not incurred any expenditure for earning such exempt income. Then to cover out such type of disputes between the assessee and the tax department, government introduced the concept of Rule 8D, proportionate disallowance. The formula is given in Rule 8D, and the disallowance is required to be calculated based on the formula. Now the question particular before the Supreme Court was whether proportionate disallowance of interest paid by bank is called for under section 14A of the Income Tax Act for investment made in tax-free bond securities which yield tax-free dividend and interest when assessee has sufficient interest-free own funds. The issue here is when the assessee is having interest-free fund, interest-free own funds, which are even more than the amount of investment which are made by the assessee, then whether any proportionate disallowance is called for or not. The assessee is a bank, and in this case also the bunch of appeal was decided simultaneously, and this judgment would have a far-reaching impact on lot of cases which are even pending before the assessing officer and appellate authorities. In the facts of the case, none of the assessee bank against the appellant maintained a separate account for investment wherefrom the tax-free income is earned. The department took a contention that assessee is not maintaining a separate account so that nexus can be proved, And if the assessee is not able to prove the nexus, then we will go for the proportionate disallowance. Similar is the thing with the with reference to the expenditure. Neither the assessee has maintained a separate account for investment, nor any separate books or separate mechanism has been maintained by the assessee to work out which are the expense, which are the interest expense or other expense or even admin expense, which has been incurred for earning such exempt income. These are the particular facts, and these are the facts for most of the cases of 14A. Even I and you are handling the cases of 14A, this would be the basic case that the assessee is not maintaining any separate nexus-based investment or accounts to prove the source of investment from tax-free fund. The department has kept a contention before the Supreme Court that assessee has not maintained their interest-free funds in separate account. Therefore, proportionate disallowance of interest was considered to have been incurred to earn tax-free income. And the proportionate allowance as per the rule section 14A and the formula given in rule 8D is to be make addition. The assessee has taken a beautiful contention before the Supreme Court. It has simply asked the court who has right to appropriation. In respect of payment made out of mixed fund, it is the assessee who has such right of appropriation, and also the right to assert from what part of fund a particular investment is made, and it may not be permissible for revenue to make an estimation on proportionate figure. So assessee contended that, look, these are my funds, these are my investment. So technically, I will have the own isolated exclusive right to make the apportionment when I am having my interest-free funds, which are more than the investment made. Then naturally it should be out of my own funds rather than the borrowed funds, even though I have not maintained any separate account. Now we will discuss what the Supreme Court has held. Supreme Court has held that Supreme Court asked the department one single question that, look, you are asking for a separate books of account, separate mechanism and nexus based working and method to work out the in support of your proportionate disallowance. Then please let us know which is the law which obligates the assessee to maintain separate accounts. This single question the department failed to answer. The learned ASG could not provide a satisfactory answer to this question before the court. Therefore, what the court held, the proportionate disallowance of interest is not warranted under section 14A for investment which yield tax-free dividend income, interest income in those situations where interest-free own funds are available with the assessee exceeded their investment. So the finding of Supreme Court is very clear. Number one, there is no law to maintain a separate account. There is no law to maintain the nexus. Only thing the assessee need to prove is that he must have interest-free own fund which should exceed the investment amount. If this is the case, then no addition can be made applying 14A, Rule 8D or any other method or any other proportionate disallowance. So this judgment would be helpful to all of us for our tax audit reporting purpose and also handling the litigations which are pending before the assessing officer as well as the appellate authority. Now this is the law of land. We can say that our interest-free funds are more than the investment made. Therefore, there is no need for making any addition or disallowance under 14A. And if addition is made, then same should be deleted by the appellate authority. Apart from this all entire discussion on 14A, the Supreme Court went one step ahead and make some additional observation. And these additional observations are very crucial and required to be discussed because the first we will discuss what the observation is made by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, in taxation regime, there is no room for presumption and nothing can be taken to be implied. The tax an individual or an corporate is required to pay is a matter of planning for a taxpayer, and the government should endeavor to keep it convenient and simple to achieve maximization of compliance. Just as the government does not wish for avoidance of tax, equally is the responsibility of the regime to design a tax system for which a subject can budget and plan. If proper balance is achieved between these, unnecessary litigation can be avoided without compromising on the generation of the revenue. Here, the Supreme Court focus on one thing, that taxes that we pay as a civilian is cost to us. Second thing, like any other cost, this cost is also required to be planned in advance. So how can we budget and plan in advance when the law and system of the taxation is very transparent and clear? Therefore, the Supreme Court, in a way, directed the department to not to make any frivolous litigations, not to raise any frivolous issue, and not to harass the taxpayers. So technically, we can use these types of observation whenever we are defending a sheer injustice cases from revenue authority, cases of high pitch assessment, cases from where it appears that the department is asking for, department is show causing for some any arbitrary or unjustified addition. So this is very important observation of Supreme Court that we can note of. The next judgment is of Supreme Court in the case of Pepsi Food Limited. In this case, the challenge was made to the constitutional validity. Constitutional validity of third proviso to section 254(2)(a). We all know section 254 gives provides for the powers of ITAT. And in those powers of ITAT, ITAT also has a power of granting the stay. But that power is made limited, restricted by giving three provisos. The first proviso says that the tribunal cannot grant stay beyond 180 days. In the second proviso, it is provided that the stay can be extended by another 180 days, but the total should not exceed 365 days. Third proviso, which was inserted by the Finance Act, provides that automatic vacation of the stay beyond 365 days. Now the question before the court was whether the third proviso of this section is valid, whether or not the delay in disposing the appeal is attributable to the assessee. Suppose 365 days has expired, but it is not on account of the assessee. Assessee has not filed even a single adjournment. Assessee has made appearance on all the hearings date. Still, the appeal could not be disposed by the tribunal within those 365 days. Then whether the stay would be automatically vacated or should be continued. That was the question before the Supreme Court. The department argued that the law as per the section and proviso is very clear. Once the 365 days is over, your stay is over. Now you have to pay the taxes as per the recovery proceeding. The assessee challenged this proviso on the grounds of arbitrariness and discriminatory. Assessee said that this proviso is arbitrary because it is going to punish the assessee without any fault of his. The delay in the tribunal, the delay in disposal of the appeal before the tribunal is not attributable to the assessee. Still, the assessee is being punished for the same. And the other point was discriminatory because the section uses the word whether or not attributable to the assessee. So technically, those assessee who are delaying the proceeding of the ITAT and those assessee who are regularly timely attending the proceeding of ITAT are being discriminated. So based on these arguments, what the Supreme Court did, Supreme Court accepted the contention of the assessee and made some amendments, some corrections in the wordings of the proviso. Now, what Supreme Court had said, Supreme Court has said that the 365 days stay would be vacated automatically, subject to the delay must be on account of the assessee. If the delay is not on account of the not attributable to the assessee, then this proviso should not be read in a manner to vacate the stay. So this is very important decision which we all can use for stay of demand before the ITAT, despite the period of 365 days is over. The next judgment is from our jurisdiction Gujarat High Court in the case of DG Patel Construction Private Limited versus Union of India. In these cases, the reopening notices which are issued after 1/4/2021. As we all know that Finance Act 2021 has amended the entire mechanism for reopening the cases under 148. New section 148A has been inserted and old sections have been substituted. So technically the old law was applicable before 31st of March, and from 1st of April, the new law should be applicable. But because of the COVID and other reasons, the government extended the application of old law beyond the 31st March by way of issuing the notification. And the date was extended till 30th of June. So the officers used to issue notices under 148 across the country even after 1/4/2021. All these notices, many of these notices have been directly challenged before the high courts by way of writs, and many high courts have issued interim orders giving relief to the SSC. In the interim order, the high court has really stayed the proceeding and issued the notice to the department. So Gujarat High Court has recently joined Bombay, Delhi, Calcutta, and Kerala High Court. These are the 5 high courts which have issued interim orders. I am not saying the final order, I am saying interim order, wherein the proceeding are time being stayed by the court subject to the final verdict of the matter. But on the contrary, we have one judgment from Chhattisgarh High Court, wherein the court went on the emotional grounds and dismissed the writ petition of the SSC, accepting the validity of notices which are issued beyond 148. So the score is 5:1. 5 high courts matter is pending and stay has been granted. But one high court, Chhattisgarh High Court, single judge bench order, the matter is decided in favor of the revenue. This is this issue of issuance of notice under 148 reopening after 1/4/2021 as per the old law would be hot topic, burning issue, and it would have a lot of litigation right up to the Supreme Court level. So only the time will tell that which view is correct, the view which we are taking as a tax practitioner, as a SSC, or the view which the Chhattisgarh High Court and the view of the department as per the notification is correct. So we will have to track all these types of developments with respect to notices under 148. Time being, in the state of Gujarat, the Judicial High Court will prevail, and in all cases of 148 which are after 1/4/21, one can proceed for challenging the same on the basis of technicality of old law versus new law. The next judgment is also very interesting, and this also involves multiple high courts. As we all know, from this year, the entire assessment was made in the faceless manner. The notices were issued facelessly by remote officer without any name, and the assessment was being made based on the submission and based on the replies of the SSC. Lot of practitioners have observed that while doing such kinds of assessment, though some orders are passed very genuinely and in a proper reasonable manner, accepting the arguments of the SSC and taking the view as per the law, but in some cases the issues has been reported of very high pitch assessment, one-sided view, and making the assessment without issuing any show cause, without issuing any draft order, without giving virtual hearing, even though it was asked by the SSC, and even without considering the adjournment. Sometimes it may also have happened that assessment is made without considering the submission which is duly filed by the SSC and which is on record of the portal. Still, the AO is writing in the order that no submission is filed by SSC and I am making the addition. So these are the cases which can be bundled as cases where the natural justice has ampled. In all such kinds of cases, the SSC has right to approach the High Court directly, bypassing the appeal route on the grounds of natural justice. So lot of high courts across India have accepted such kinds of writs and admitted the writs. Then in some of the high court cases, particularly when we are referring this particular case from Delhi High Court, YCD Industries versus National Faceless Assessment Center, the court has accepted the view of the SSC, submission of the SSC, but what ultimately did is very interesting. The court set aside the impugned assessment order and notice issued under 156 and 270A, read with 274. Technically, the court set aside the entire assessment and related procedures However, a concluding remark was made in the assessment order, which is very important to note. The court has given a direction. However, the liberty was given to revenue to pass a fresh assessment order as per law and also grant a personal hearing to the authorized representative of the assessee. Now, one interesting question that may come out, and that is a poser for all of you, considering the directions given by the court in such kinds of cases. And this is the same direction, common direction, which is given in all the cases where the faceless assessment order has been challenged by way of writ. So the poser for all of you is, what would be the time limit for passing such fresh assessment order? Because there is no technical mention in section 153, which provides for different types of time limits for making the assessment in such types of cases. 153 contains a provision that the time limit would be extended for the period for which the court proceedings are stayed by the court. But in such kinds of cases, the said provision may not be applicable because the court was approached only after the passing the assessment order. So the interesting question that would arise here is whether after such kind of direction from the court, whether the assessing officer would have sufficient time as per law for making the assessment under section 153, or such types of order would be time barred. That posture is very interesting, and I would require deliberation on part of all of your experience and expertise. Next judgment is from Mumbai High Court, full bench, Mohammad Farhan Sheikh versus DCIT. This is very important issue. Penalty under section 271(c). Concealment. We all know section 271(c) is for levy of penalty, either for the concealment of income or for furnishing inaccurate particulars of income. Now, this judgment is all about the procedure which is being followed by the officer while imposing such kinds of penalty. Concealment, non-striking of irrelevant phrase in the notice issued under 271 read with 274, whether it would vitiate the entire proceeding or not. What the AO usually does in this section is they used to issue the penalty notice in pre-printed manner without ticking out or without crossing the irrelevant part and without ticking out the relevant part. The wording of this notice, which is pre-printed form of the department, is you are charged with the penalty has been initiated in your case for concealment of income and oblique or furnishing inaccurate particulars of income. Now the AO is not taking the pen to tick mark the correct position, the correct allegation, or to strike out the irrelevant part of the notice. He simply used to issue the pre-printed notice to the assessee. So this issue reached before the Bombay High Court. Bombay High Court took a historical legislative background of this particular legal position and then found that there are 4 judgments from Bombay High Court itself in favor of the assessee, which says that pre-printed notice would not suffice the requirement of law. If it is issued in a pre-printed manner, then same should be considered as issued without application of the mind. And then there was also Bombay High Court decision in the case of CIT versus Srimati Kaushalya, in which the Bombay High Court has held in favor of the department. So as we all know, whenever there is a conflict between same High Court on the very same issue, then the conflict has to be resolved by way of full bench. So question was raised before the full bench that if the assessment order clearly records satisfaction for imposing penalty on one or the another or both the ground mentioned in section 271(c), does a mere defect in the notice, not striking of the irrelevant matter, vitiate the entire penalty proceeding? This was the particular question which was raised before the Bombay High Court. Now, what the assessee's contention were taken? Assessee took a contention that penalty proceedings are different from assessment proceeding. Number 1, both are different and independent of each other. Both has nothing to do with each other. Number 2, third point was combined reading would create confusion in the mind of the assessee and disable him from defending his case. Department cannot ask assessee to read the assessment order for one purpose and then read the penalty notice for another purpose. So when assessee is charged with any proceeding or any penalty allegation, then those allegations should come out very clearly in the notice itself, which is issued for the penalty reply. Fourth point was not permissible to presume the charge. You cannot keep the assessee in the lingering and to presume what the charge is and how to reply the same. Penal law must be strictly construed. So these were the 5 contentions that were taken by the assessee before the Bombay High Court in support of the view that pre-printed notice without striking off irrelevant part would not be valid one. The department took lot of contentions. The department contentions were penalty proceeding have their foundation from the assessment proceeding. The department tried to connect the penalty proceeding with the assessment proceeding. So what they argued that penalty proceeding have foundation from the assessment proceeding. Number 1, AO has applied his mind with respect to initiation of penalty in the assessment proceeding. So department is taking shelter of application of mind for penalty in the assessment proceedings. That was number 2. Third, principle of natural justice already ingrained in section 274. Department is saying that we are issuing notice under 274 that would suffice the requirement of natural justice. Once the charge is very clear in the assessment order, then the form in which the notice is issued loses its significance. This was very vague argument which was made by the department that, sir, look, our assessment order, the charge is very clearly framed in the assessment order. So the entire procedure of issuing notice under 274 for penalty would be a mere formality, and the form in which the notice is issued would not have any much significance. So even though something is not striken out in the notice, would not vitiate the entire proceeding. And ultimately, the department argued that merely technical infraction of law should not vitiate the entire proceeding. So we have discussed the assessee's contention as well as the department's contention. Now, what the court has held? The court said that the assessment proceedings forms the basis for penalty proceeding, but they are not composite proceeding to draw strength from each other. The court accepted the part argument of the department that assessment proceeding are the basis for penalty proceeding, but they are not composite proceeding. Both should be read independently, both should not be read jointly. Second point, nor can cure each other's defect. So if there is a defect in assessment order, it could not be cured from the penalty proceeding. And if the defect is in penalty proceeding, same cannot be cured from the assessment order. Penalty proceeding must stand on its own. This is very important finding given by the court, that penalty proceeding must stand on its own. It cannot take support from the assessment proceeding. Accordingly, the assessee must be informed of the grounds of the penalty proceeding only through the statutory notice, which is issued under section 274. And omnibus notice suffers from the vice of vagueness. Accordingly, the court dismissed the case of the department and held that such kinds of pre-printed notices would not fulfill the requirement of the law. So this is very important judgment for all of us practitioners, and we can argue based on the reasoning given by the assessee and ultimately held by the court before our cases which may be pending before the authorities. The next case is from the Delhi High Court, which is very recent one and very interesting and very new topic and useful for all of us. This case was all about the applicability of most favored nation clause, MFN clause. So what were the facts of the case? The assessee is a tax resident of Netherlands. The assessee was resident of Netherlands but working from India. Therefore, and it was expecting some dividend income from its wholly owned subsidiary in India. Indian subsidiary was going to distribute dividend to the 100% wholly owned assessee, which is located in Netherlands. So what the assessee did, assessee made application under section 197 before the AO for lower rate deductions. The assessee applied for deduction at lower rate at the rate of 5%. Now, if we refer to the India Netherlands DTAA and the interest dividend taxable provisions, the rate for dividend taxation for Netherlands company is 10%. But what the SSC did, SSC made a lower rate application before the AO requesting for a 5% lower rate. And in justification of the same, the SSC said that I am invoking benefit of most favored nation clause of India-Netherlands Treaty. Now we will discuss first what is the most favored nation clause. Friends, most favored nation clause is a beneficial provision which might be available in the which is available only if it is forming part of the treaty. Suppose in this case, India and Netherlands are the two countries. India and Netherlands are two countries dealing with each other, but India has also executed a DTAA with Slovenia, a third country, after the execution of DTAA with Netherlands. So what the MFN clause provides that suppose today two countries are entering into a particular DTAA and deciding the tax rate for dividend at 10%. Later on, India enter into DTAA with a third country, wherein India decide 5% tax rate. So the first country may argue that why you have taken 10% for us and why you have given concessional benefit of 5% to the third country. So to avoid such kinds of dispute and discrimination, there is a concept of MFN clause which provides that if the India enters into a treaty with other OECD member subsequent to execution of this treaty and give any benefit or relaxation to such country, then such benefit and relaxation would automatically apply to the first country also. So in this case, in our example, suppose India Netherlands dividend was decided at 10%, India Slovenia dividend was decided at 5% later on. So the Netherlands company, Netherlands SSC can always apply the MFN clause and argue for the benefit of 5% reduction, 5% concession, which was given to Slovenia country. So accordingly, using such kind of MFN clause, the SSC made a low rate application. The EU rejected the contention of the SSC and issued the withholding certificate at 10%. These were the facts of the case. Now we will refer to the MFN clause that I have briefed to you. This is the exact MFN clause which provides that India should limit its taxation at source on dividend interest to a rate lower or scope more restricted. Both things are covered. Suppose any future treaty is entered into by India in which the rate is lowered or some scope is restricted, then such kind of benefit would be automatically applied to the first treaty partner. Now, what the contention which has been raised by the department? Department took contention that MFN clause benefit only if beneficial treaty country must be OECD member at the time of executing India-Netherlands treaty. In this case, what was happened that at the time of executing India-Netherlands treaty, Slovenia was not a OECD member. In the facts of the case, Slovenia was not OECD member at the time of India-Netherlands treaty. Further, no notification has been issued by government for MFN clause India-Netherlands treaty. So these are the two contention which has been raised by the department. Now, what the SSC took contention? SSC said that MFN benefits are automatic and does not require separate notification. SSC said that once the MFN clause is in the DTAA, then it would be automatically applicable and it would not subject to a separate notification. That was number one. Second point, MFN triggers when India enters into treaty with any OECD country. It triggers automatically. And third point, relevant position of MFN invocation must be as on the date when the benefit is sought by the SSC and not on the date when the treaty was executed. So SSC argued that, sir, you look the position of whether the Slovenia is OECD member or not on the date when I am making the application for lower rate. You cannot relate back this position at the time of India-Netherlands treaty. The High Court held that the protocol of DTAA forms integral part of DTAA and there is no requirement of issuing a separate notification. So the first point was very clearly answered by the High Court is that the MFN clause would apply automatically and no need for separate notification. And second thing, High Court rejected the contention of the revenue that MFN clause of Netherlands DTAA could be applicable only in case where the third state is a member of OECD on the date when the DTAA has been entered into with India. Whereas the DTAA Slovenia were entered into with India when these countries were OECD member and become OECD member only on later date. So ultimately what the court has held, that position to be seen as on the date on which the benefit is sought by the assessee. At the time when the assessee made the lower rate application, then the assessee has to, AO has to check two conditions: whether the benefit is given to third country, the answer is yes. Second, whether the third country is the member of OECD, the answer is yes, but as on the date of making the application for lower rate. While discussing this case, the High Court has also given importance to the common interpretation rule. The High Court has said that the cutoff date is nowhere mentioned in the Act or treaty, but a common interpretation has to be adopted for deciding which date would be the cutoff, or position is to be seen on which date. Treaty to be commonly interpreted in India in the same manner as interpreted by the Netherlands. And the hard work of the Council for the assessee in searching out some Netherlands court decision would also help the assessee and also referred and relied in for the interpretation. So ultimately, court has held that attempt should be made to choose a view that finds general acceptance with courts and authorities. Next judgment that we are going to discuss is by Delhi High Court, Principal CIT versus Anand Kumar Jain. In this case, two issues were discussed by the High Court. Both are very interesting issues. The first question before High Court was whether statement recorded under 132(4) can be considered as incrementing material or not. And the second question is invocation of 153C instead of 153A when the incrementing material is seized from third party. This case law and discussion relating to this is very important for all type of search and seizure cases, where the discussion is on the incrementing material found from the third party. These are the facts of the case. Assessee was covered under 132. The search was conducted on the assessee and assessment was made under section 153A. As we all know, if the assessee is covered under 132 search, then assessment would be made under 153A. The scope and ambit of 153A of the Act are well defined. There are a lot of judgments which says that 153A in the assessment under section 153A, addition can be made only if there is some incrementing material. So existence of incrementing material found during the course of search is sine qua non for making the addition. If there is no incrementing material, then the addition cannot be made. No addition can be made merely based on statement under section 132(4) recorded during the search of third party without any incrementing material. So these are the facts of the case. In facts of the case, parallel search was conducted on the assessee as well as some entry operator. Assessee has taken the accommodation entries of long-term capital gain, which were used to be exempt under 1038. Assessee claimed the exemption under the 1038. In the entire search at the assessee, nothing was found because the transactions are duly recorded in books. Offered for taxation subject to exemption in the ITR forms. There was no tax impact and the benefit of 1038 was claimed by the assessee. So nothing was found from the premises of assessee. Then on the contrary, at the search on the entry operator, the entry operator given the name of the assessee, entry operator admitted under section in the statement under section 132(4) that he has given accommodation entries to these parties, and these are not the genuine transactions. So what the AO has done, AO made addition based on such statement of third person without any incrementing material in the case of the assessee, and that too assessment was made under 153A. So High Court had said one thing, that statement recorded during the course of search is not an incrementing material which is found during the search. Incrementing material is something which must be found during the search, and the statement which is recorded is not a material, number one, and this is not found during the course of search. It is recorded during the course of search. Therefore, no reliance can be made on such 132(4) statement, and it cannot be equated with incriminating material. That was finding number one. The second interesting aspect which was dealt with by the Honorable High Court was that the AO has made addition based on the statement of third party, which was covered in search also. Even if it is considered to be an incriminating material, then also no action can be taken under 153A of the Act. The only legal resource available with the AO was to proceed in terms of 153C. The court held that on this count also the addition should be deleted. So this discussion of the court then gives us altogether new thought. Even though the assessee is covered under 153A, assessee is covered in the search, still no addition can be made under section 153A based on the incriminating material which is found at third party search. If it is found at third party search, the addition could only be made under 153C and not under 153A. So these types of finding on the extreme technicality level would be helpful to lot of cases which we are handling. Because as a practice in the department, what the AO does, AO makes all type of additions in the consolidated order which is passed under 153A. No separate order under section 153C is passed in case of assessee who is also covered in search. So this view of High Court gives us altogether new new line of thought and issues to think on. Next decision of Delhi High Court is very interesting one. Pradeep Kumar Jindal versus PCIT. In this case, what the tribunal did, tribunal simply dismissed the appeal of the assessee by writing that assessee has not appeared. Therefore, it appears that assessee is not interested in the appeal and disposed the appeal. The matter went to the High Court. High Court, by referring to the tribunal rules, Rule 24 of the ITT, High Court said that it is duty of the tribunal to dispose any appeal on merits, even though the assessee or the department is appearing or not. Non-prosecution by any of the party should not be a basis for disposal of the appeal. The appeal should be disposed only on the merits. So these types of judgment would be helpful to all of us whenever any case is decided by the any appellate authority, be it CIT appeal, tribunal or High Court, for the want of prosecution. If sometime we fail to appear and the order is passed based on the ground that no one appeared. So these kinds of judgment can be made useful. The next decision is from Ahmedabad ITT. It is very interesting, very thoughtful and factual judgments. DCIT versus Ozone India Limited. First of all, we will discuss the facts of the case. It is a case of amalgamation of two companies. Amalgamation case using the pooling of interest method, and the scheme was duly approved by the Gujarat High Court. Two companies, Kalaveer Estate Private Limited, merged into the Ozone India Limited. During the course of merger, the assets which were revalued and ultimately valued at 60 crore was transferred from Kalaveer to Ozone, and liability of 6 crore were transferred from Kalaveer to Ozone. So technically the net asset of 54 crore were transferred. And in consideration of the same, as per the scheme which is approved by Gujarat High Court, shares were issued at fair value, and 15 crore rupees shares were issued in exchange of 54 crore net worth. The difference of 39 crore was accounted as capital reserve in the books of amalgamated company. Then the AO raised the issue of this difference. AO said that you are getting the assets of net 54 crore and issuing shares only of 15 crore. Therefore, you are hit by the provisions of section 56 to 7B. Technically, the provision of section 56 to 7B is for the taxation of receipt of excess premium. But the AO applied the same in the facts of the case and make the addition. The matter went before the tribunal. The assessee took a contention that, sir, please refer to the intent of section 56(2)(b). Assessee has given the legislative history of entire section 56(2)(b), why it was inserted into the statute book. Reference was also made to the FM speech which specifically said that this provision is inserted to discourage generation and use of unaccounted money and the practice of receiving the excess share premium. The amendment was made in Finance Act 2012. The SSC contended that capital reserve cannot be equated with share premium. Both are different things. You cannot treat both as one and same. So ultimately, Section 5627B should not be applied. After considering the facts of the case, the ITT held that 5627B, first of all, is a deeming fiction. It deems something as income which actually is not income. Then reference is also made to CIT versus Mother India Refrigerator Private Limited. Legal fictions are only for a definite purpose, and they are limited to the purpose for which they are created and should not be extended beyond the legitimate field. By quoting this judgment, the ITT held that the legal deeming fiction should be strictly interpreted and it should not be extended beyond what it covers. No share premium was charged as a matter of fact because the share was issued at the face value. No consideration was received for issue of shares. Then ITT said to the department, let us go through the wording of Section 5627B. The 5627B covers the issue of receipt of excess share premium. So in this case, neither the share premium is charged nor anything is received. What the assessee is received is the asset in exchange of the share of the amalgamated company. Technically, this transaction is executed in a tripartite manner. So no consideration is received from the party to whom the share is issued. Therefore, this judgment is very important in all the cases of merger amalgamations and scheme of reconstructions, wherein AO ought to apply Section 56(2)B for any valuation difference or whatever accounting treatment that we all do for the amalgamating companies as per the accounting standards and Ind AS. Instead of understanding those treatment correctly, the AO usually invokes Section 56(2)7B. So this is very important judgment in all such cases. The next important judgment is from Mumbai ITT, Maria Fernandez versus ITO. In this case, the matter was of Section 56C. As we all know, 50C cover the issue of doing transactions in owned property, land or building below the fair market value or below the gentry value, stamp duty value. But in some genuine cases, there may be some difference, some minor variations in the actual sale price and the gentry value. Still, in those cases, AO used to make the additions. So, to avoid such kinds of arbitrariness and ungenuineness, the government has introduced a tolerable limit of 5% in Section 50C Wide Finance Act 2018. The government has said that if the variation between the stamp duty and actual consideration received is up to the 5%, then no addition can be made. And this limit was further revised to 10% by Finance Act 2020. So this judgment covered both the amendments, and reference is also made to Circular 8 of 2018, wherein the reason also given for such kinds of amendment. It was given in the circular that variation between stamp duty value and actual consideration received can occur in respect of similar property in the same area because of variety of factors, including the shape of the plot or location. So we have a tolerable limit of now 10%, but the amendment was made with effect from 2018 and 2020. But the SSC argued that these amendments, being the curative in nature, should be applied retrospectively. And the ITT was pleased to order the retrospective application of such kinds of amendment to Section 50C. Therefore, now the extended limit of 10%, which is provided from Finance Act 2020, would be applicable even to the previous year's cases also. So in a way, this judgment is very helpful for all the matters wherein the litigation is with respect to Section 50C, and the variation is up to the range of 10%. Next decision is also from the Ahmedabad ITT. It is also on the very interesting issue and some technical point. The matter is for Rajesh Kumar Shantilal Patel versus ITO. In this case, facts are as under. In facts of the case, there was a jointly owned property. Two persons were co-owners, Mr. A and B. It was sold below the stamp duty value. So what AO did, AO issued 148 notice in the hands of one person, citing the valuation difference as per section 50C and alleged for the escapement of the income. The case was reopened. The assessee argued that, sir, this is a jointly owned property. It is owned by Mr. A and Mr. B. You have reopened the case of Mr. A. Department has opened the case of A and accepted the case of B. So technically, all the co-owners must be treated equally. The assessee used this technical plea and also made a reference to the decision of Ahmedabad ITT, Mohanlal Ambalal Desai versus ITO, wherein the ITT has observed that all the co-owners of the property must be treated equally. So in this case of one co-owner was reopened under 148 and another case of the co-owner was normally accepted as return income and processed under 143.3. No reopening was made. The department argued that, sir, we have not accepted the treatment in other case. We simply didn't reopen it. So it cannot be treated that department has given favor to one party and treating adversely to the another. This was the department's contention. So tribunal ultimately held that you see the ultimate picture. You are not touching Mr. B. You are not reopening the case of Mr. B. And this means that indirectly you have accepted the return of Mr. B. So now you cannot reopen the matter of Mr. A also, which is who is the co-owner of the property. And ultimately all the co-owners of the property, all the co-owners must be treated equally. If you have rescued Mr. B, then you should also leave Mr. A and no tax should be levied. Ultimately, the decision was given in favor of Mr. A and the opening was dropped. The next decision is from Agra ITT and a very recent decision and a very recent matter. Now, we all know that all the pending appeals, except the search cases, would be handled by the National Faceless Appeal Center. We have to make the written submissions. We have to make appearance virtually before the National Faceless Appellate Authorities, which may be situated across country, remote location. We may not know the location also. So in such cases, which law, which citation would prevail? Here in normal traditional appeals, what we used to say that, sir, this matter is covered by jurisdictional tribunal judgment, jurisdictional high court judgment, and the authority used to accept our contention based on the principle of settled principle of precedent. But now the question is whether the faceless authorities, faceless appellate authorities are bound by the judicial Ahmedabad ITT tribunal in case of suppose Ahmedabad, whether they are bound by the Ahmedabad ITT decisions, Gujarat High Court decisions or any other decisions, High Court decisions of the country. In this particular case, the matter was relating to the addition of late employees contribution to PF, late payment. We all know that Gujarat High Court is negative on this particular point and other 4 or 5 High Courts are positive on this point. Even though the Judicial High Court of the SSC in this case was favorable, still the EU made the addition, still the appellate authority upheld the addition citing the Gujarat High Court. So matter went before the ITT. ITT analyzed the entire jurisdictional and jurisprudence relating to this particular subject and then decided that National Faceless Appeal Center situated in Delhi is bound by precedent laid by the High Court exercising territorial jurisdiction over the SSC's AO. SSC's claim of deduction on delayed contribution was disallowed by AO, which was upheld by NFAC by relying on Gujarat High Court ruling and in disregard of ruling in favor of the SSC rendered by the Allahabad High Court. So the matter belonging to the Agra, SSC based at Agra, so the Judicial High Court would be the Allahabad High Court. Allahabad High Court has given positive verdict on this matter, but still the faceless appellate authority applied the non-judicial High Court, which was Gujarat High Court in this case, and ordered against the SSC. So these types of judgment we can use before all our pending appeals. wherein we want to take strength from any judicial Ahmedabad tribunal or Ahmedabad Gujarat High Court decisions, and that would be binding on such types of appellate authority which may be located anywhere in India. What is relevant is the location of the assessee and assessee's AO. The jurisdictional, it is well settled principles of precedents that the judicial ITT and judicial High Court judgment would be binding over the appellate authority, particularly the CIT appeal. The next decision, probably the last one, Mumbai ITT decision, Betrim UK Limited versus DCIT. This is very interesting judgment. In this case, the facts of the matter are as matter of tax withholding demands under 201 with respect to 195 of the Income Tax Act. Assessee made payment to a non-resident, which technically we all know covers to withholding tax subject to provision of 195. Assessee failed to deduct the tax on the same. The department issued notice under 201 and asked for the tax and interest from the assessee for failure to withhold the tax. Then, in the meanwhile, the party to whom the assessee has made the payment, case was also opened by the department. And in those proceedings, the counterparty proved and ultimately got a relief from the tribunal that the transaction or the receipt were not taxable at all. So this pair take a help from the decisions which were given in the case of counterparty, that when the sum is not taxable at all, then how can I be made responsible under section 195 of the Income Tax Act? Ultimately, the tribunal has held that a tax withholding liability, particularly under section 195, is vicarious liability, and its survival would depend entirely on the survival of the primary tax liability of the income. Suppose income is not taxable at all at primary level, then one cannot be held responsible for failure to deduct tax under 195 of the Income Tax Act. This is the annexures wherein all the judgments that we have discussed is cited out and with the respective citation. Thank you. So we can have now any question answer or any discussion on any of the judgment that we have discussed, sir. Now we can make this interactive session and discuss openly on any of the issues relating to the citations that we have discussed. One question that we have got in the chat box is, can one say 234B issue discussed here is applicable to the residents too? So on this point, my view is that Supreme Court has discussed and dealt with the applicability of section 234B vis-a-vis section 209 of the Act. It would not make any difference whether the person is non-resident or resident. The principle and logic and reasoning would remain same, and this judgment can also be applied to the cases of resident as well, in my view. Sunil ji?
Any questions, anyone? Sunil ji, there is one question, you answered it. Yes, there
Yes,
is
sir.
one more. सुनील जी
जी
चैट
सर,
बॉक्स पे एक क्वेश्चन आया है
what is it? That is the same issue, 234B.
anyone any question please, we have a lot of time, we can utilize the services of Sunil ji.
Yes, we can have this interactive and exchange of thought can also happen.
Yeah, Sunil ji, can you close the screen sharing so other person can be
Yes,
visible to us?
yes, please. Vishal ji, what is your view on the time barring matter of faceless orders which are being set aside? Any thought?
Actually, we have, I am practicing in, my partner is looking after direct tax.
Okay.
So I'm looking after indirect tax. But I have one issues
Yes.
that regarding that about the 15C and CB uploading. The process, I think 15C is going through, but 15CB is not, it at portal is not allowing, I think so.
Okay.
So another issue is that regarding the TDS of the foreign payment, I don't know. And one thing that regarding faceless assessment, I would be what I am doing. I just do what I am doing. That we are very using very simple English language that is
Yes.
understandable to layman. And secondly, we put everything what we want to say to the officer in words because it's a faceless. And
Correct.
most importantly, that what date is given, we are not going for adjournment for it because
Absolutely.
in indirect tax GST there we have submitted the adjournment and they have rejected after 4 days and now they are not accepting the documents. So that same thing will
Okay.
happen in the income tax portal, I think so. So I would suggest that we should not miss out the dates, either it is based direct tax or indirect tax at present, because we have
Yeah,
submitted,
absolutely.
we have emailed them, we have submitted physically, and we have received letter today that your adjournment has been rejected.
Because this time we have faced such type of lot of issues with the
Yeah,
faceless authorities. Even though we are filing the submission, it reflects to them 1 or 2 days after.
and I don't know, although my friends over here and the senior members, actually their understanding, they don't want to understand, or their understanding is not at par, we don't know about it. So it's little bit a tough question to all of us.
Yes.
I think it's, oh no, there is one question. How department can charge interest in lieu of 3234B?
Department can charge interest from the person who has liability to deduct the TDS under section 201.
Okay.
Yes. So if a person is making default in deducting the TDS, the counter person should not be punished with 234B. That is the logic of Supreme Court.
Anyone, any queries not related to the topic, you can also share, or we have time, we can have a share, or we can just stop the seminar of today. I don't know anyone is having any query. It's 156 participant at present. Sunil ji. Thank you, Sunil ji.
Thank you, sir.
But we, due to certain unavoidable circumstances, we have postponed this seminar and you have taken this today. And very nice of you. And I think it's this topic is such that whenever we heard, we are learning every time. We are learning every time. It's not like that we can dominate this topic. It's a learning topic every time. And I'm very thank you everyone for participating in Ahmedabad branch and all the I'm thanking you, Sunil ji, from the Ahmedabad branch and all the participants over here for a wonderful seminar. And thanks. And the presentation of Sunil ji will be shared by tomorrow. I think Sunil ji will email to
I will
Hari
share
ji
it.
or Sunil Sanghvi sir. So they will
Definitely, sir.
email to everybody present over here. Okay. Thank
Definitely.
you. Thank you so much, Sunil ji.
Thank you.
Thank you.